Chapter 21 of Love Insurance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Love Insurance by Earl Derr. Chapter 21. High Words at High Noon. In the Harrowby suite, the holder of the title, a handsome and distinguished figure, adorned for his wedding, walked nervously the rather worn carpet. His brother, hastily pressed into service as best man, sat puffing at a cigar with a persistency which indicated a somewhat perturbed state of mind on his own part. "Brace up, Alan," he urged. "It'll be over before you realize it. Remember my own wedding? Gad, wasn't I frightened? Always that way with a man. No sense to it, but he just can't help it. Never forget that little parlour, with the flower of marrying society all about, and me with my teeth chattering and my knees knocking together." "It is a bit of an ordeal," said Alan weakly. "Chap feels all sorts of gone inside." The telephone, ringing sharply, interrupted. George Harrowby rose and stepped to it. "Alan? You wish Alan? Very well, I'll tell him." He turned away from the telephone and faced his brother. "It was old Mayrick, kid. Seems somewhat hot under the collar. Wants to see you in their suite at once."
What do you imagine he wants?"
"Gonna make you a present of Riverside Drive, I fancy. Go ahead, boy, I'll wait for you here." Alan Harrowby went out, along the dusky corridor to the Mayrick door. Not without misgivings he knocked. A voice boomed, "Come!" He pushed open the door. He saw Spencer Mayrick sitting purple at a table, and beside him Cynthia Mayrick, in the loveliest gown of all the lovely gowns she had ever worn. The beauty of the girl staggered Harrowby a bit. Never demonstrative, he had a sudden feeling that he should be at her feet.
You sent for me?"
he asked, coming into the room. As he moved closer to the girl he was to marry, he saw that her face was whiter than her gown, and her brown eyes strained and miserable. "We did," said Mayrick, rising. He held out a paper. "Will you please look at that?" His lordship took the sheet in unsteady hands. He glanced down. Slowly, the meaning of the story that met his gaze filtered through his dazed brain. Martin Wall did this, he thought to himself. He tried to speak, but could not. Dumbly, he stared at Spencer Mayrick. "We want no scene, Harrowby," said the old man wearily. "We merely want to know if there is in existence a policy such as the one mentioned here." The paper slipped from his lordship's lifeless hands. He turned miserably away, not daring to face either father or daughter. He answered very faintly, "There is." Spencer Mayrick sighed. "That's all we want to know. There will be no wedding, Harrowby."
"What?"
His lordship faced about.
"Why, sir? The guests must be downstairs."
"It is unfortunate, but there will be no wedding." The old man turned to his daughter. "Cynthia," he asked, "have you nothing to say?"
"Yes."
White, trembling, the girl faced his lordship.
"It seems, Alan, that you have regarded our marriage as a business proposition. You have gambled on the stability of the market. Well, you win. I have changed my mind. This is final. I shall not change it again."
"Cynthia!" And any who had considered Lord Harrowby unfeeling must have been surprised at the anguish in his voice.
"I have loved you. I love you now. I adore you. What can I say in explanation of this? We gamble, all of us. It is a passion bred in the family. That is why I took out this absurd policy. My dearest, it doesn't mean that there was no love on my side. There is. There always will be. Whatever happens. Can't you understand?"
The girl laid her hand on his arm and drew him away to the window.
"It's no use, Alan,"
she said for his ears alone.
"Perhaps I could have forgiven, but somehow I don't care, as I thought I did. It's better, embarrassing as it may be for us both, that there should be no wedding after all." "Cynthia, you can't mean that. You don't believe me. Let me send for my brother. He will tell you of the passion for gambling in our family. He will tell you that I love you too."
He moved toward the telephone.
"No use," said Cynthia Mayrick, shaking her head. "It would only prolong a painful scene. Please don't, Alan."
"I'll send for Minot, too," Harrowby cried.
"Mr. Minot?"
The girl's eyes narrowed.
"And what has Mr. Minot to do with this?" "Everything. He came down here as the representative of Lloyd's. He came down to make sure that you didn't change your mind. He will tell you that I love you.
A queer expression hovered about Miss Mayrick's lips. Spencer Mayrick interrupted. "Nonsense!" he cried. "There's no need to—"
"One moment."
Cynthia Mayrick's eyes shone strangely.
"Send for your brother, Alan. And for Mr. Minot."
Harrowby stepped to the telephone. He summoned his forces. A strained, unhappy silence ensued. Then the two men entered the room together.
"Minot,
George, old boy," Lord Harrowby said helplessly.
Miss Mayrick and her father have discovered the existence of a certain insurance policy about which you both know. They have believed that my motive in seeking a marriage was purely mercenary, that my affections for the girl who was to have become my wife cannot be sincere. They are wrong, quite wrong. Both of you know that. I've sent for you to help me make them understand. I cannot."
George Harrowby stepped forward and smiled his kindly smile. "My dear young lady," he said, "I regret that policy very deeply. When I first heard of it, I, too, suspected Alan's motives. But after I talked with him, after I saw you, I was convinced that his affection for you was most sincere. I thought back to the gambling schemes for which the family had been noted. I saw it was the old passion cropping out anew in Alan. That he was really not to blame. That beyond any question he was quite devoted to you. Otherwise, I'd have done everything in my power to prevent the wedding."
"Yes?" Miss Mayrick's eyes flashed dangerously. "And your other witness, Alan?"
The soul of the other witness squirmed in agony. This was too much, too much!
"You, Minot," pleaded Harrowby. "You have understood."
"I have felt that you were sincerely fond of Miss Mayrick," Minot replied. "Otherwise, I should not have done what I have done."
"Then, Mr. Minot," the girl inquired, "you think I would be wrong to give up all plans for the wedding?"
Yes, I do," breathed Minot.
"And you advise me to marry Lord Harrowby at once?"
Mr. Minot passed the handkerchief over his damp forehead. Had the girl no mercy? "I do," he answered miserably. Cynthia Mayrick laughed, harshly, mirthlessly.
"Because that's your business, your mean little business," she said scornfully. "I know at last why you came to San Marco. I understand everything. You had gambled with Lord Harrowby, and you came here to see that you did not lose your money. Well, you've lost. Carry that news back to the concern you work for. In spite of your heroic efforts, you've lost. At the last moment, Cynthia Mayrick changed her mind." Lost. The word cut Minot to the quick. Lost indeed. Lost Jephson's stake. Lost the girl he loved. He had failed Jephson, failed himself. After all he had done, all he had sacrificed. A double defeat, and therefore doubly bitter. "Cynthia, surely you don't mean—"
Lord Harrowby was pleading.
"I do, Alan," said the girl more gently. "It was true, what I told you, there by the window. It is better. Father, will you go down and say I'm not to be married after all?"
Spencer Mayrick nodded and turned toward the door.
"Cynthia!"
cried Harrowby brokenly. There was no reply. Old Mayrick went out.
"I'm sorry," his lordship said. "Sorry I made such a mess of it. More so because I love you, Cynthia, and always shall. Goodbye."
He held out his hand. She put hers in it.
"It's too bad, Alan," she said, "but it wasn't meant to be. And even now you have one consolation, the money that Lloyds must pay you."
"The money means nothing, Cynthia." "Miss Mayrick is mistaken," Minot interrupted. "Lord Harrowby has not even that consolation. Lloyds owes him nothing."
"Why not?" asked the girl defiantly.
"Up to an hour ago," said Minot, "you were determined to marry his lordship?"
"I should hardly put it that way, but I intended to."
"Then you changed your mind. Why?"
"I changed it because I found out about this ridiculous, this insulting policy."
"Then his lordship's taking out of the policy caused the calling off of the wedding?"
"Yes. Why?"
"It may interest you to know, and it may interest Lord Harrowby to recall, that 5 minutes before he took out this policy he signed an agreement to do everything in his power to bring about the wedding. And he further promised that if the wedding should be called off because of any subsequent act of his, he would forfeit the premium."
By gad, said Lord Harrowby.
The taking out of this policy was a subsequent act, continued Minot. The premium, I fancy, is forfeited. He's got you, Alan, said George Harrowby, coming forward. And I for one can't say I'm sorry. You're going to tear up that policy now, and go to work for me.
I for one am sorry, cried Miss Mayrick, her flashing eyes on Minot. I wanted you to win, Alan. I wanted you to win.
Why? Minot asked innocently.
You ought to know,
she answered and turned away. Lord Harrowby moved toward the door.
We're not hard losers, he said blankly,
but everything's gone.
It's a bit of a smash-up. Goodbye, Cynthia. Goodbye, Alan. And good luck.
Thanks. And Harrowby went out with his brother. Minot stood for a time, not daring to move. Cynthia Mayrick was at the window. Her scornful back was not encouraging. Finally, she turned, saw Minot, and gave a start of surprise.
Oh, you're still here?
Cynthia, now you understand, he said. You know why I acted as I did. You realize my position. I was in a horrible fix. She looked at him coldly.
Yes,
she said.
I do understand. You were gambling on me. You came down here to defend your employer's cash. Well, you have succeeded. Is there anything more to be said?
Isn't there? On the ramparts of the old fort the other night.
Please do not make yourself any more ridiculous than is necessary. You've put your employer's money above my happiness. Always. Really, you looked rather cheap today with your sanctimonious advice that I marry Harrowby. Aren't you beginning to realize your own position? The silly, childish figure you cut? Then last night, when you came staggering across the lawn to me with this foolish gown in your arms, I told you I hated you. Do you imagine I hate you any less now? Well, I don't.
Her voice became tearful.
I hate you. I hate you.
But someday... She turned away from him, for she was sobbing outright now.
I never want to see you again as long as I live, she cried. Never, never, never.
Limp, pitiable, worn by the long fight he had waged, Minot stood staring helplessly at her heaving shoulders. Then I can only say I'm sorry, he murmured. And goodbye. He waited. She did not turn toward him. He stumbled out of the room. End of chapter 21.
Chapter 22 of Love Insurance. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Love Insurance by Earl Derr Biggers. Chapter 22. Well, hardly ever. Minot went below and sent 2 messages, one to Jephson, the other to Thacker. The lobby of the De la Paix was thronged with brilliantly attired wedding guests who, metaphorically, beat their breasts in perplexity over the tidings that had come even as they craned their necks to catch the first glimpse of that distinguished bridal party. The lavishly decorated parlor that was to have been the scene of the ceremony stood tragically deserted. Minot cast one look at it, and hurried again to his own particular cell. He took a couple of timetables from his desk, and sat down in a chair facing the window. All over now. Nothing to do but return to the north as fast as the trains would take him. He had won, but he had also lost. He felt listless, weary. He let the timetables fall to the floor, and sat gazing out at that narrow street, thinking, wondering, wishing. It was late in the afternoon when the clamor of his telephone recalled him to himself. He leaped up and seized the receiver. Alan Harrowby's voice came over the wire. "Can you run down to the room, Minot?" he inquired. "The last call, old boy." Minot went. He found both the Harrowbys there, prepared to say good-bye to San Marco forever. "Going to New York on the Lady Evelyn," said George Harrowby, who was aggressively cheerful. "From there I'm taking Allan to Chicago. Going to have him reading George Ade and talking our language in a week." Lord Harrowby smiled wanly. "Nothing left but Chicago," he drawled. I wanted to see you before I went, Minot, old chap. Not that I can thank you for all you did. I don't know how. You stood by me like a gentleman. And I realize that I have no claim on Lloyd's. It was all my fault. If I'd never let Martin Wall have that confounded policy. But what's the use of ifing? All my fault. And my thanks, old boy. He sighed. Nonsense, said Minot. A business proposition solely, from my point of view. There's no thanks coming to me. It seems to me, said George Harrowby, that as the only victor in this affair, you don't exhibit a proper cheerfulness. By the way, we'd be delighted to take you north on our boat. Why not? But Minot shook his head. Can't spare the time. Thank you just the same, he replied. I'd like nothing better. Amid expressions of regret, the Harrowbys started for the elevator. Minot walked along the dusky corridor with them. We've had a bit of excitement, what? Said Allan. If you're ever in London, you're to be my guest. Old George has some sort of a berth for me over there. Not a berth, Allan, objected George, pressing the button for the elevator. You're not going to sleep. A job. Might as well begin to talk the Chicago language now. Mr. Minot, I, too, want to thank you. They stepped into the elevator, the door slammed, the car began to descend. Minot stood gazing through the iron scroll-work until the blond head of the helpless Lord Harrowby moved finally out of sight. Then he returned to his room and the timetables, which seemed such dull, unhappy reading. Mr. Jack Paddock appeared, to invite Minot to take dinner with him. His bags, he remarked, were all packed, and he was booked for the 7 o'clock train. I've slipped down the mountain of gold, he said in the course of the dinner, but all good things must end, and I certainly had a good thing. Somehow, I'm not so gloomy as I ought to be. Where are you going, Jack? Minot asked. Mr. Paddock leaned over confidentially. Did I say her father was in the plumbing business? He inquired. My error, Dick. He owns a newspaper out in Grand Rapids. Offered me a job any time I wanted it. Great joke then, pretty serious now, for I'm going out to apply. I'm glad of it. So am I, Dick. I was a fool to let her go back like that. Been thinking it all over and over. One girl in... How many are there in the world, should you say? The other day I had a chill. It occurred to me maybe she'd gone and married the young man with the pale purple necktie who passes the plate in the Methodist church. So I beat it to the telegraph counter, and... She's heart-whole and fancy-free? O.K. in both respects. So it's me for Grand Rapids. And I say, Dick, I want you to know I'd sent that telegram before the accident last night. As a matter of fact, I sent it 2 days ago. Good boy, said Minot. I knew this game down here didn't satisfy you. May I be the first to wish you joy. You, with a face like a defeated candidate? I say cheer up. She'll stretch out eager arms in your direction yet. I don't believe it, Jack. Well, while there's life, there's still considerable hope lying loose around the landscape. That's why I don't urge you to take the train with me. An hour later Mr. Paddock spoke further cheering words in his friend's ear, and departed for the north. And in that city of moonlight and romance, Minot was left, practically, alone. He took a little farewell walk through that quaint little town, then retired to his room to read another chapter in the timetable. At 4:20 in the morning, he noted, a small local train would leave for Jacksonville. He decided he would take it. With no parlor cars, no sleepers, he would not be likely to encounter upon it any of the startled wedding party bound north. The call he left did not materialize, and it was 4 o'clock when he awoke. Hastily in the chill dawn he bade farewell to town and hotel. In 15 minutes he had left both behind, and was speeding toward the small yellow station set up on the town's edge. He glanced feverishly at his watch. There was need of haste, for this train was made up in San Marco, and had had as yet no chance to be late. He rushed through the gate just as it was being closed, and caught a dreary little train in the very act of pulling out. Gloomy oil lamps sought vainly to lessen the dour aspect of its 2 coaches. Panting, he entered the rear coach, and threw himself and his bag into a seat. 5 seconds later he glanced across the aisle and discovered in the opposite seat Miss Cynthia Merrick, accompanied by a very sleepy-eyed family. "The devil!" said Minot to himself. He knew that she would see in this utter accident nothing save a deliberate act of following. What use to protest his innocence? He considered moving to another seat. But such a theatrical act could only increase the embarrassment. Already his presence had been noted. Aunt Mary had given him a glare, Spencer Merrick a scowl, the girl a cloudy vague "where have I seen this person before?" glance in passing. Might as well make the best of it. He settled himself in his seat. Once again, as on another railroad car, he sought to keep his eyes on the landscape without, the dim landscape with the royal palms waving like grim ghosts in the half-light. The train sped on. A most uncomfortable situation. If only it would grow light. It seemed so silly to be forced to find the view out the window entrancing, while it was still very dark. Spencer Merrick went forward to the smoker. Aunt Mary, weary of life, slid gently down to slumber. Her unlovely snore filled the dim car. How different this from the first ride together! The faint pink of the sky grew brighter. Now Minot could see the gray moss hanging to the evergreens, and here and there a squalid shack where human beings lived and knew nothing of life. And beside him he heard a sound as of a large body being shaken. Also the guttural protest of Aunt Mary at this inconsiderable treatment. Aunt Mary triumphed. Her snore rose to shatter the smoky roof. 3 times Minot dared to look, and each time wished he hadn't. The whole sky was rosy now. Somewhere off behind the horizon the good old sun was rising to go to work for the passenger department of the Coast Railroad. Some sense in looking out now. Minot saw a shack that seemed familiar, then another. Next a station, bearing on its sad shingle the cheery name of Sunbeam, and, close to the station, gloomy in the dawn, a desiccated chauffeur beside an aged automobile. Minot turned quickly, and caught Cynthia Merrick in the act of peering over his shoulder. She had seen the chauffeur too. The train had stopped a moment, but was under way again. In those brown eyes Minot saw something wistful, something hurt, saw things that moved him to put everything to a sudden test. He leaped to his feet and pulled madly at the bell cord. What have you done?" Startled, she stared at him. "I've stopped the train. I'm going to ride to Jacksonville as I rode to San Marco ages ago. I'm not going alone." "Indeed?" "Quick! The conductor will be here in a minute. Here's a card and pencil. Write a note for Aunt Mary. Say you'll meet them in Jacksonville. Hurry, please." "Mr. Minot!" with great dignity. "One last ride together. One last chance for me to set things right if I can." "If you can." "If I admit it. Won't you give me the chance? I thought you would be game. I dare you." For a second they gazed into each other's eyes. The train had come to a stop, and Aunt Mary stirred fretfully in her sleep. With sudden decision Cynthia Merrick wrote on the card and dropped it on her slumbering relative. "I know I'll be sorry, but," she gasped. "Hurry, this way. The conductor's coming there." A moment later they stood together on the platform of the Sunbeam station, while the brief little train disappeared indignantly in the distance. "You shouldn't have made me do that!" cried the girl in dismay. "I'm always doing things on the spur of the moment, things I regret afterward." "I know. You explained that to me once. But you can also do things on the spur of the moment that you're glad about all your life. Oh, good morning, Barney Oldfield." "Good morning," replied the rustic chauffeur with gleeful recognition. "Where's it to this time, mister?" "Jacksonville, and no hurry at all." Minot held open the door, and the girl stepped into the car. "The gentleman is quite mistaken," she said to the chauffeur. "There is a very great hurry." "Ages of time until luncheon," replied Minot blithely, also getting in. "If you were thinking of announcing something, then I shall have nothing to announce, I'm sure. But I must be in Jacksonville before that train. Father will be furious." "Trust me, lady," said the chauffeur, grinding again at his hooded music box. "I've been doing stunts with this car since I saw you last. Been over 100 miles from Sunbeam. Begins to look as though Florida wasn't going to be big enough after all." He leaped to the wheel, and again that ancient automobile carried Cynthia Merrick and the representative of Lloyd's out of the town of Sunbeam. But the exit was not a laughing one. The girl's eyes were serious, cold, and with real concern in his voice, Minot spoke. "Won't you forgive me? Can't you? I was only trying to be faithful to the man who sent me down here, faithful through everything, as I should be faithful to you if you gave me the chance. Is it too late, Cynthia?" "There was a time," said the girl, her eyes wide, "when it was not too late. Have you forgotten that night on the balcony, when I threw myself at your feet, and you turned away? Do you think that was a happy moment for me?" "Was it happy for me, for that matter?" "Oh, I was humiliated, ashamed. Then your silly rescue of my gown, your advice to me to marry Harrowby." "Would you have had me throw over the men who trusted me?" "I don't know. I only know that I can't forgive what has happened in a minute." "What was that last?" "Nothing." "You said in a minute." "Your ears are deceiving you." "Cynthia, you're not going to punish me because I was faithful. Don't you suppose I tried to get someone in my place?" "Did you?" "The day I first rode in this car with you. And then I stopped trying." "Why?" "Because I realized that if someone came in my place I'd have to go away and never see you again. And I couldn't do that. I had to be near you, dear girl. Don't worry, he can't hear. The motor's too noisy. I had to be where I could see that little curl making a question mark round your ear. Where I could hear your voice. I had to be near you even if to do it I must break my heart by marrying you to another man. I loved you. I love you now." A terrific crash interrupted. Dolefully, the chauffeur descended from the car to make an examination. Dolefully, he announced the result. "Busted right off," he remarked. "Say, I'm sorry. I'll have to walk back to the garage at Sunbeam, and I'm afraid you'll have to just sit here until I come back." He went slowly down the road, and the two sat in that ancient car in the midst of sandy desolation. "Cynthia," Minot cried, "I worship you. Won't you—" The girl gave a strange little cry. "I wanted to be cross with you a little longer," she said almost tearfully. "But I can't. I wonder why I can't. I cried all night at the thought of never seeing you again. I wonder why I cried. I guess it's because, for the first time, I'm really in love." "Cynthia!" "Oh, Dick, don't let me change my mind again. Ever, ever!" "Only over my dead body." With one accord they turned, and looked at that quaint southern chauffeur plodding along through the dust and sunshine. It did not seem to either of them that there was any danger of his looking back. And happily he didn't. The End. End of chapter 22. Recording by Todd. End of Love Insurance by Earl Derr Biggers.